Here you go.
There you go. I did that same thing, but,
I know what you mean, Chris, because that happens all the time.
okay. It's your granddaughter.
Charlie, can you say hello to Senator Gray?
Hello. Well, you're gonna be on TV. When you get home, you can see yourself on
say
TV.
All right, well, you're all set.
Thanks, Jude. All right.
Senator Campion's in the waiting room. I'm admitting him.
Oh, he's in the living room?
I let him in. I got it.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Wait a minute, just.
All right. So with that taken care of, let me make the official announcement and off we go. And since I'm alone, I don't have to wear this. Good afternoon. It's Monday, April 4th, 2022. It's 3:06 p.m. And this is a meeting of Senate Natural Resources and Energy to continue our discussion and walkthrough of H715, an act relating to the Clean Heat Standard. Thank you to committee members for making the time to meet this afternoon. We have, as best I can tell from conversations with the coroner office, 12 more regular meetings, 3 weeks of meetings, and we have the same number of bills. So that's a topic for a future conversation, but we are really making our way through H715. We got as far as page 9, I think it was, 10. We'll have to pick it back up. Ellen, I don't know if you want to do a little preamble or just jump right in. Up to you.
Sure. So Ellen Tchaikovsky, Office of Legislative Counsel. On Friday, I was in your committee doing the walkthrough on this Clean Heat Standard bill. You had a lot of discussion. I'll recap slightly. This is a bill that would require the Public Utility Commission to design and implement a clean heat standard program. It sets some specifics about that program, but it leaves to them quite a few details to fill in. And so the overall structure of the program is that obligated parties who sell fossil heating fuel into the state will be required by the PUC to reduce the amount of greenhouse gas emissions they produce every year by a certain percentage in order to reduce the state's greenhouse gas emissions as required under the Global Warming Solutions Act. So this is aimed at the state's thermal sector. There are a number of pathways that a obligated party can take to reach this requirement every year, but it does require the retiring of clean heat credits, which is something that the PUC is also going to have to design and set up a system for. So there are a lot of elements of this bill, and we're only on page 10. So I think the goal today is to get through walking through the rest of the language in the bill, but also hopefully answer more of your questions as we go through.
Great.
So I'm going to share my screen. But yes, where we left off on Friday was on page 10, subsection G, which is on enforcement. And we've already touched on it a little bit briefly in our conversations on Friday. So the PUC shall have the authority to enforce the requirements of this chapter and any rules or orders adopted to implement the provisions of this chapter. The Commission may use its existing authority under this title, so in Title 30, as part of an enforcement order. The Commission may order penalties and injunctive relief. The Commission may order an obligated party that fails to retire the number of clean heat credits retired in a given year, including the required amounts from low income and moderate income customers, to make a non-compliance payment to the default delivery agent. The per credit amount of the non-compliance payment shall be 3 times the amount established by the PUC under subsection F for timely per credit payments to the default delivery agent. So what that is saying there is that the PUC is going to set the regular amount that a obligated party will have to pay to a default delivery agent. And that's if they're opting, if they're choosing to use the default delivery agent to supply their credits, there's going to be a price set by the PUC. However, if they fail to meet their annual amounts and they don't opt to use the default delivery agent up front, the payment they'll be required to pay is 3 times as much per credit as if they had complied. Any statements or other representations made by obligated parties related to compliance with the clean heat standard are subject to the Commission's enforcement authority, including the power to investigate and assess penalties under this title.
So on 2, this, it seems as though basically there's a penalty built in because credits are whatever, 3 times as pricey as when you use the default delivery agent to secure them, when you secure them from their default delivery agent. And is that, yeah, kind of,
there's going to be a
you get
price.
caught breaking the rules, isn't it?
Yeah, the 3 times amount is for if you've broken the rules and failed to meet your obligation. The PUC is going to set a price. Let's call it $10. If during the course of the year, a fuel supplier wants to just purchase their credits from the default delivery agent, there's going to be a price set by the PUC, and maybe it's $10 per credit. So they can choose up front to do that and say, I want to just purchase my credits from the default delivery agent. If, however, after the year is over and they have not complied and met their number of credits, the non-compliance payment is 3 times the amount set by the PUC. So it would be $30 per credit.
got it. Okay.
So it really is incentivizing choosing that option up front if they are unable to, if they don't think they're going to be able to do the work themselves, or if they haven't been able to purchase enough credits from the market, they should opt early to purchase them from the default delivery agent.
Got it. Thank you.
And can I just, and how do you get to be a default agent?
That is going to be, the PUC is going to select them through a competitive bid process. It's actually on the prior page. And it's going to be an entity that the PUC is going to award a contract to. And they are going to be a single statewide entity capable of providing a variety of clean heat measures. So the PUC is going to go through a bid process to see who is going to be the state default delivery agent.
Thanks. Forgive me for asking a question about something you've already covered, but this is there's so much and so complicated.
Yeah, no worries. I don't think we've all memorized the bill yet. That's for sure.
Yeah, we covered a lot of topics on Friday, sort of just like as you had questions. So no worries. So on to page 11, records. The commission shall establish requirements for the types of records to be submitted by the obligated parties, a record retention schedule for required records, and a process for verification of records and data submitted in compliance with the requirements of this chapter. So there's going to be a lot of things that go into the accounting in this system. So the PUC is going to need to set up a record retention system and what kind of documentation obligated parties will need. So then there are going to be annual reports So for the purposes of this section, the standing committees means the House committees on energy and technology and on natural resources, fish and wildlife, and the Senate committees on finance and natural resources and energy. After the adoption of the order implementing this chapter, the commission shall submit a written report to the standing committees detailing the efforts undertaken to establish the clean heat standard pursuant to this chapter. On or before August 31st of each year following the year in which the order is first adopted, the PUC shall submit to the standing committees a written report detailing the implementation and operation of the clean heat standard. This report shall include an assessment on the equitable adoption of clean heat measures required under subsection D, along with recommendations to increase participation for the households with the highest energy burdens. The provisions of 2 VSA 20D, expiration of required reports, shall not apply to the report to be made under this section. So annual reports will be coming August 31st each year after the system is set up.
The on or before August 31 of each year. So the timeline for full enactment is 2025, right? So
Yes.
we won't be seeing these till after. Okay, thank you.
The order is scheduled to be adopted by July 1, 2024. And so giving 6 months notice that the clean heat standard is going to take effect January 1, 2025.
Thanks.
Okay, page 12, section 8124, tradable clean heat credits. By rule or order, the commission shall establish or adopt a system of tradable clean heat credits that may be earned by reducing greenhouse gas emissions through the delivery of clean heat measures. While credit denominations may be in simple terms for public understanding and ease of use, the underlying value shall be based on units of carbon dioxide equivalent. The system shall provide a process for the recognition, approval, and monitoring of the clean heat credits. The Department of Public Service shall perform the verification of clean heat credit claims and submit the results of the verification and evaluation to the commission annually. So the Department of Public Service is going to be involved in the verification of clean heat credits.
Ellen, I don't know if the chair sees my hand up, so I'm just going to ask, what's an equivalent, a CO2 equivalent?
So these fuels that it's to cover all of the greenhouse gases that will be emitted from the fuel. So the burning of fossil fuel emits things besides carbon dioxide, like methane. And so when the fuel is evaluated, and we're going to get to that shortly, the calculation is going to be converting it to carbon dioxide equivalent. And so that no matter what you're using, it's all going to be expressed in the same units of measurement.
I see. So you're going to get to a part of this where it's going to pull this apart a little bit more.
A little bit more, yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
But that's the units of measurement to be used for greenhouse gas reduction.
Was there a reason they didn't spell out, put in methane and other, rather than just say equivalent?
So it's because there are it's a unit of measurement, and so you're looking to have there be a greenhouse gas emission reduction, and so it's really just choosing what the unit of measurement is on that. And that is fairly common in the climate change sector. Is we're picking this is how we're going to measure this reduction.
Thank you.
Senator Campion, I think it came out of, the first, the highest profile emission was carbon dioxide. And then people said, well, but nitrous oxide, sulfur dioxide, all these other things are problematic as well, even if they're much, much lower levels. So instead of having to name different things, someone said, okay, we'll use CO2 as like the baseline, and then things are named in terms of a CO2 equivalent. Some will be higher, some will be lower. But it lets you put it into one common unit.
Thank you.
Is that like another weighting study?
Yes, it's a weighting
System?
study.
We're going to attach the weighting study to this bill.
Okay.
And someone has entered the waiting room, so I suspect it could be Senator Westman.
Okay, shoot over there.
Okay.
Oh, yes, iPad, that's Senator Westman.
Okay, so subsection B. So on the same topic here and related a bit to what Senator Campion just asked, clean heat credits shall be based on the life cycle carbon dioxide equivalent emission reductions that result from the delivery of eligible clean heat measures to end use customer locations in or into Vermont. Eligible clean heat measures delivered to or installed in Vermont shall include thermal energy efficiency improvements and weatherization, the supply of sustainably sourced biofuels, renewable gas and low emission advanced gases, the installation of cold climate heat pumps and efficient electric appliances providing thermal end uses. Onto page 13, advanced wood heating appliances and systems, and renewable energy-based district heating services. So this is the initial list of actions that are eligible for clean heat credits. The commission has the ability to revise and add to this list of things that are eligible for credits, but these are some of the examples of things that can earn clean heat credits because they cause a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions.
Ms. Chakowski, on number 2 there, sustainably sourced biofuels. I've received, I'm guessing every member of the committee has received one or more emails about the notion of how good an idea or not it is to have biofuels and how sustainable they are or are not. Did the House have a lot of discussion about that topic? And this is a little vague. Chair Briglin said you may well want to define sustainably as part of your work in the Senate. I'm just trying to understand if that they did work but couldn't settle on something, or it was for the sake of keeping moving, they just said sustainably and kept going. Yeah, that kind of thing.
It's difficult for me to characterize that.
Well, I guess we have to come back to it.
Yeah, so I would just say that none of the words in that sentence are defined. It may be helpful if you would like to define them, but.
Okay, thank you.
So on page 13, subsection C, for pipeline renewable natural gas and other renewably generated natural gas substitutes to be eligible, an obligated party shall purchase renewable natural gas and its associated renewable attributes and demonstrate that it has secured a contractual pathway for the physical delivery of the gas from the point of injection into the pipeline to the obligated party's delivery system. So this is requiring that for natural gas to be eligible, renewable natural gas to be eligible for credits, the obligated party has to own the RECs for it. So the demonstration that it is renewably sourced.
So owning your RECs is part of ensuring that you can get a clean heat credit for it?
Yeah, and I think that that makes sense in this context, right? Because as you know, when you have a source, there's the energy itself and then the renewal attributes, and those two things can be separated. Like if someone sells the RECs, and so this is saying for natural gas to be considered renewable and therefore eligible for these credits, you need to have the renewable attributes attached and therefore retire the attributes, the RECs.
Okay, great. I just wanted to make sure that they had to be retired. Thanks.
So may I?
Yep.
Please.
So
I can only see one person at a time, so thanks for jumping in.
renewable, how does natural gas at all renewable? This is just a little bit of, so I understand you're saying the pipeline to actually get the natural gas has to somehow be renewed. I just missed the part where the chair was talking about, and you somehow there was something that was going to happen that was going to not actually, it would then be considered renewable. Could you say that again?
Sure. So like an example here would be like landfill generated gas, like from a methane source.
Okay.
And so the obligated party here has to retain the RECs demonstrating that this is a renewably generated source.
I see. That's perfectly clear. Thank you.
Yep.
Got it. Thanks.
Right, and Senator Campion, the other big project in my neighborhood is there's Goodrich Farm in Salisbury has a line, a pipe all the way back to Middlebury College from the farm.
Right. So yeah, like a biodigester.
Right. Great. Yep. I do remember hearing something about that. Great. Thank you.
Mr.
Senator
Chair,
McDonald.
Senator McDonald.
is the talking about the contractual pathway for physical delivery of the gas, aren't they just, is this referring to a verification of the volume of what's going from one end to the other?
Yes. So there was testimony that it is going to be very difficult to demonstrate with gas. It's very difficult to demonstrate the exact mix at any one time for any one customer.
Right. You can compress water, you can compress gas, but you can't compress water. So you have to have a standard temperature pressure stuff. Is that what we're talking about here?
Yes, I think this is more trying to say
it's a physics problem, not a philosophical thing. It's just a physics problem to verify the quantities of delivery. Is that what this is about?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay. And Ms. Schakowsky, so is the other piece, I mean, the contractual pathway, that means it physically has to be in the system. They can't buy renewable natural gas in Colorado and use it like an offset or something, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Okay. To promote certainty for obligated parties and clean heat providers, the Commission shall, by rule or order, establish a schedule of life cycle emission rates for heating fuels and eligible clean heat measures. The schedule shall be based on transparent and accurate emissions accounting, adapting the Argonne National Laboratory GREET model, or an alternative of comparable analytical rigor to achieve the thermal sector greenhouse gas emissions reductions necessary in order to meet the sector's share of the requirements of the Global Warming Solutions Act, and to deter substantial unintended harmful consequences. The schedule may be amended based on changes in technology or evidence on emissions, but clean heat credits previously awarded shall not be adjusted retroactively. So I think you're going to hear more about this later in the week, but the Argonne National Laboratory created the GREET model, and this establishes a number of variables that go into calculating the life cycle emission rates for fuel. So the PUC is going to adapt the Argonne National Laboratory's model to be used. And then they're going to set a schedule so that it will be predictable for people to know that if they install a cold climate heat pump or advanced wood heater or do weatherization work, approximately how many credits they're going to be able to generate based on this modeling. Clean heat credits shall be time-stamped for the year in which the clean heat measure is delivered, as well as each subsequent year during which the measure produces emission reductions. Only clean heat credits with the current year timestamp and credits banked from previous years shall be eligible to satisfy the current year obligation. So a clean heat credit can only be used once towards the obligation. However, certain things will generate clean heat credits for years at a time. So for example, if you weatherize a home, it will cause there to be an emissions reduction in the first year, as well as in the second, third, fourth year, because there will be less fossil fuel needed to heat that home for years into the future. Clean heat credits can only be earned in proportion to the deemed or measured thermal sector greenhouse gas emission reductions achieved by a clean heat measure delivered in Vermont. Other emissions offsets, wherever located, are not eligible measures. So the clean heat work has to be done in Vermont in order to achieve greenhouse gas emissions reductions in Vermont. All eligible clean heat measures that are delivered in Vermont shall be eligible for clean heat credits and may be retired and count towards an obligated party's emission reduction obligations, regardless of who creates or delivers them, and regardless of whether their creation or delivery was required by other state policies and programs. This includes individual initiatives, emission reductions resulting from the state's energy efficiency programs, the low income weatherization program, and renewable energy standard tier 3 program. And so this is saying if the work is being done because it's required by an existing state or local program, that doesn't matter. They're still going to be eligible for credits and participate in this system. The commission shall create a registration system to lower administrative barriers to individuals and businesses seeking to register qualified actions eligible to earn clean heat credits and to facilitate the transfer of credits to obligated parties. The commission may hire a third-party consultant to evaluate, develop, implement, maintain, and support a database or other means for tracking clean heat credits and compliance with the annual requirements for obligated parties. The system shall require entities to submit the following information to receive credit: the location of the clean heat measure, whether the customer or tenant has a low or moderate income, the type of property where the clean heat measure was installed or sold, the type of clean heat measure, and any other information required by the commission. And
So-
nothing in this chapter shall limit the authority of natural resources to compile and publish the greenhouse gas emissions inventory.
This, I'm being relegated to a bunch of words. These paragraphs are trying to identify a problem that, a goal that they're trying to solve. Can you tell us what, do we know what that is?
Yeah, yes. So currently, these clean heat credits, they don't exist. They're not being used by anyone else in the country as far as we are aware. So the PUC is going to have to do work to establish not only the credits themselves, but also, I'm picturing a website, but a registration system where this information can be stored and monitored. So there's going to need to be not only the credits themselves, but the infrastructure for the credits to be, put on paper that someone, like there's going to need to be the information saying you have earned a credit, and then which will allow people to then trade or sell these credits. So the PUC is going to have to do that as well.
So this is where if you're not careful, a horse can be sold more than once or 1.25 times, or
Yes.
it's trying to deal with that sort of issue.
Yes.
A valid currency or a valid commercial exchange that's not exaggerated or stretched by cleverness.
Yes.
Okay.
To follow up on Senator McDonald's question, so the time stamping part of it identifies the year the measure was delivered. And then, so you cited weatherization, for instance. Are they going to assign a lifespan for the effectiveness of that clean heat measure? And so eventually it will expire. I don't know what the expiry on weatherization is, maybe 20 years or something, but so some measures will expire in 1 year, others will keep on going. Like biofuels, that would be a one-time credit, but it's just that load you delivered at that moment, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. And this is allowing the PUC to hire a third-party consultant to do this work, because this is probably going to take some effort to set up. And on the information I read on page 15 in subsection 2, the House was also interested in making sure there was some data collected on what types of clean heat measures were being credited. So and as I think you've heard before, the House was really concerned about making sure there was even distribution for low and moderate income customers to get these credits. So that's why to get your credit, you have to provide at least this information. That way there will be some data gathered on how many people are doing weatherization projects, how many people are installing advanced wood heaters, and what are the incomes of those people, and what kinds of properties are they being installed at?
Can you explain sub I, there are two sub I, like why does that have to get called out explicitly, how it won't interfere?
I honestly don't know. A&R requested that language specifically.
Okay.
So
Thank
I don't
you.
know if they were worried that that last paragraph maybe seemed like the exclusive way that this information was being addressed or collected. I'm not sure, but they requested that.
Okay, thank you.
Is the nothing in the chapter thing?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
is this perhaps a shield against someone jumping up and saying proprietary information, you can't tell anybody?
Potentially.
Okay.
Yeah, there are a few instances in this bill where there was an effort to more directly reference the greenhouse gas emissions inventory, and there's opportunity here for the work that happened under the clean heat standard to better inform or inform the emissions inventory. So I do think there was interest in having A&R have access to and be able to work with the PUC and DPS to make sure that they're getting data that could be helpful for them.
That makes sense.
Okay. 8125 Clean Heat Standard Technical Advisory Group. The commission shall establish the Clean Heat Standard Technical Advisory Group, or what we've been calling the TAG, to assist the PUC in the ongoing management of the Clean Heat Standard. Its duties shall include establishing and revising the life cycle carbon dioxide equivalent emissions accounting methodology to be used to determine each obligated party's annual requirement under this chapter. Establishing and revising the clean heat credit value for different clean heat measures. Assessing the sustainability of the production of clean heat measures. Setting the lifespan length of clean heat measures for the purpose of calculating credit values. Establishing credit values for each year over a clean heat measure's life, including adjustments to account for increasing interaction between clean heat measures over time, so as not to double count emission reductions. Facilitating the program's coordination with other energy programs. Calculating the impact of the cost of clean heat credits and the cost savings associated with delivered clean heat measures on per unit heating fuel prices. Coordinating with A&R to ensure that the greenhouse gas emission reductions achieved in another sector through the implementation of clean heat standard are not double counted in the greenhouse gas emissions inventory and forecast produced by A&R. Advising the commission on the periodic assessment and revision requirements established under 8123A4 of this chapter, and any other matters referred to the tag by the commission. So a lot of what is going to go into the clean heat standard is pretty technical math calculations. There's going to need to be a schedule set up for emission reductions so that it can be predictable for people. They're going to need to look at the different technologies that are eligible for clean heat credits and set values for them, including how long they should be eligible for credit and how many credits they should be getting each year. So that's a lot of technical math that's going to need to happen. Yeah.
There's a lot of eighth graders trying to figure out how to game this system, and someone has to be watching out.
Yes, and so I'm going to give you the members of this group, but there is also going to be a third-party consultant who will be also assisting with doing the math.
And do you have a sense, Ms. Shagowski, of if, sort of the frequency of meetings? Like, is this setting up a work group that has one steady person running it and then other people are like coming in to consult? But I'm just trying to have a sense of how full-time it is. Sounds like at least at the outset, they have a lot of work to do.
I don't know how often they will meet. There's mention in here, what I just read, about the periodic assessment and revision based on updates, in one category, there's like the new technology that comes into the market for things that are not currently already well known. And so how many credits is this new technology going to be eligible for? But there's also revision based on further understanding on how these technologies are working and how much emissions reductions they're actually generating based on refining the modeling. So I don't know specifically. They also have a lot of tasks in here. So I'm not sure. I do think there will be a lot of upfront work, but.
Okay, thank you.
So the membership of the tag they'll be appointed by the PUC, and at a minimum shall include at least one representative for each of the following groups: the obligated parties, the Department of Public Service, the Department of Environmental Conservation, Efficiency Vermont, the electric utilities, and environmental organizations. Members who are not otherwise compensated by their employer shall be entitled to per diem compensation and reimbursement under 32 VSA 1010.
Ms. Chakowski, I think when Mr. Koda was in, I thought, one of my notes said that he thought, fuel dealers needed to be represented, but wouldn't fuel dealers be covered by that first term, obligated parties?
It depends. So the realm of obligated parties is fairly large, and it depends. So not all fuel dealers will be obligated parties, because the obligated party will be the first person making the sale of fuel into Vermont. So at some level, there'll be wholesalers. So the obligated parties are going to be a mix of different entities. There was discussion in the House of if there should be multiple members of the obligated parties on the tag for the different types of obligated parties. But they just went with the one representative from each of the groups. So you could potentially be more specific, but not all fuel dealers potentially will be obligated parties.
So if a wholesaler who's bringing the fuel into Vermont is obligated, does that mean that each of the fuel dealers delivering that fuel has no obligation, or is the obligation transfer? Like, who owns the obligation after that initial sale from the wholesaler? Someone who's actually bringing fuel to a customer?
It's the party that makes the first sale of fuel into Vermont for consumption of fuel in Vermont.
Okay.
So if a fuel wholesaler is selling to dealers, the dealers are not obligated. It's the entity that's making the first sale in Vermont.
Okay. So a company that I think of as my local fuel dealer only picks up this obligation if they themselves buy it from out of state and bring it in.
Yes.
As opposed to a wholesaler bringing it to them for resale. Okay.
Yes.
Got it. Thanks. I had somehow imagined everyone delivering fuel had the obligation, but I can see how it's not that simple.
Right. And there are issues with designing the model that way. And like the hypothetical is that basically if were all the parties to just move over the border into either New Hampshire or New York, then they could avoid participating in this system. And it is, I think, and there was testimony in the House that there are a number of dealers that do cross over state border to bring fuel into Vermont, and they're fuel dealers. And so, yes, that's why it's the point of first sale into Vermont.
Okay. So if someone said, I'm gonna relocate over the Connecticut River into New Hampshire, they're fine, but as soon as they make a delivery into Vermont, then with each delivery, they have an obligation,
Yes.
right? Okay, thanks.
Okay, so I'm on page 17, subsection C. The commission shall
I'm sorry,
hire,
say, where are we again? Which page?
page 17,
Thank you.
subsection C. The commission shall hire a third-party consultant responsible for developing clean heat measure characterizations and relevant assumptions, including carbon dioxide equivalent life cycle emissions analyses. The Clean Heat Standard Technical Advisory Group shall provide input and feedback on the consultant's work. So the tag is going to, the consultant is going to be doing a lot of the upfront math. The tag is going to review their work and provide input on the assumptions and math that they're doing. And then in subsection D, emissions analyses and associated assumptions developed by the consultant shall be reviewed and approved annually by the commission. In reviewing the consultant's work, the commission shall provide a public comment period on the work, and the commission may approve or adjust the consultant's work as it deems necessary based on its review and the public comments received. So this is attempting to have some transparency in the math that's going into the analysis done for clean heat credits. So the consultant's going to do some math, the tag is going to review their work and provide input on the variables and assumptions. Then the PUC, though, ultimately has to approve or adjust the numbers used in these analyses. But they will be also providing for public comment periods so people can see the rates before they actually go into effect and provide and say, you know, you didn't take into account this variable, or you didn't take into account this, or this should be adjusted. So there are multiple steps in how this is going to be defined and analyzed.
So this phrase, as it deems necessary based on its review and public comments, I'm just, the earlier sections of the bill, like page 7, D, equitable distribution of clean heat measures. Is that the kind of, are those the design criteria that are going to guide what is necessary and what is not? I'm just trying to understand a little better the constraints on the PUC as it adjusts the work of the consultants.
I don't think so. I think this is leaving open some opportunity for people to potentially make arguments about the easiest example that comes to mind, and I don't want to like open this too far, but sustainably sourced biofuels. That is something that the consultant and the tag are going to look at in order to determine the life cycle analysis of these fuels. So there could be room for argument in whether or not something has been sustainably sourced and how that should be accounted for in the calculation. So I think that's more of the type of calculations that are going to go on here.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so the last statutory section is on the Clean Heat Standard Equity Advisory Group. And so this is something that was added fairly late in the discussion by the House. So the commission shall establish the Clean Heat Standard Equity Advisory Group to assist the commission in developing and implementing the Clean Heat Standard in a manner that ensures an equitable share of clean heat measures are delivered to low and moderate income Vermonters, and that low and moderate income Vermonters who are not early participants in clean heat measures are not negatively impacted in their ability to afford heating fuel. Its duties shall include providing feedback to the Commission on strategies for engaging low-income and moderate-income Vermonters in the public process around the development of the Clean Heat Standard, supporting the PUC in assessing whether customers are equitably served by clean heat measures and how to increase equity in this area, identifying actions needed to provide better service to and mitigate the fuel price impacts calculated by the tag of this on low income and moderate income customers, recommending any additional programs, incentives, or funding needed to support low income and moderate income customers and organizations that provide social services to Vermonters in affordable heating fuel and other heating expenses, and providing feedback to the PUC on the impact of the Clean Heat Standard on the everyday experience of low income and moderate income Vermonters.
So this sounds a little like the environmental justice bill.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Did-
yeah,
Or how to write voting restrictions.
Sorry, Senator McDonald, I couldn't hear that.
Or it's like anything else, like how to create voting restrictions that serve your voters as opposed to, the people that wouldn't be your voters. You look for little places to, squeeze, or you please change your office hours, or there are all sorts of ways to, make it harder for certain groups of people to apply for things, or whether it's, weatherization or this, that, and the other stuff. It's, it's kind of checking to see that, individuals don't put
It would seem like at
funnel
some
more
point-
goodies their way.
It would seem like at some point, this process section ought to be reconciled with the environmental justice bill. I'm not saying like it has to happen now, but for instance, here it's naming the group to pay attention to is low and moderate income Vermonters. But in the EJ bill, it's low income Vermonters, members of the BIPOC communities, and those who have limited English language proficiency. So they're not quite the same. Okay.
Yeah, yes. And if you were, usually commodities have prices and everybody pays the same price, except if you're a frequent flyer, you have green stamps, or if you buy in volume, or, you buy 3 months ahead of time. And those are all ways to not treat people equally. And the commission is supposed to look and make sure that that sort of stuff isn't going on in the delivery of these programs and services.
And so I'll just add, House Energy, I don't know if they knew you were working on an environmental justice bill, and nothing is certain until it's signed into law.
Right.
And so I will say that this, as I've already referenced, there's sort of a 2.5-year runway on this bill. So the 2023 and 2024 legislative sessions, should you pass the Clean Heat Standard, there will be time potentially to amend the statute before the Clean Heat Standard goes into effect.
Right. Great. And it's going to take, if the EJ bill passes, that's not going to be stood up quickly either, I don't think. I mean, there's a lot of work entailed there. So, okay, thank you.
Okay, so this group shall
Ms. Jakowski, may I just ask a quick
Yep.
question? So what you just said about the runway, being a couple of years, one of the things, and we don't need to pull it apart right now, but I'd like to get a good sense of what what exactly would be happening in 2 years and what might be happening immediately. And the reason is people are concerned that some of this will be happening during a particular time where prices are, even though we know that this is about stabilizing, largely trying to stabilize, costs and help people transition in an efficient, thoughtful way. Some are concerned that, it happening, parts of it happening right now the timing might not be great with fossil fuel prices, et cetera. That being said, it sounds like, again, some of this, the 2-year runway kind of takes care of some of that. Does that make sense? That concern?
Yeah, and I did make a timeline for House Energy, so I can get you that, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, I'd love to see that if you don't mind, just so I can put all the parts together a little bit better in my head, what's happening now and then what's going to be happening in 2 years.
Yeah, and I'm almost, so the third section of the bill does lay out the steps for implementation. But yeah, I did make a timeline for House Energy to put it all in one place.
Thank you.
Okay, so at the bottom of page 18, the Equity Advisory Group shall consist of up to 10 members appointed by the PUC, and at a minimum shall include at least one representative from each of the following groups: the Department of Public Service, the Office of Economic Opportunity from the Department of Children and Families, the Community Action Agencies, Efficiency Vermont, individuals with socioeconomically, racially, and geographically diverse backgrounds, renters and property owners, and a member of the Vermont Fuel Dealers Association. Members who are not otherwise compensated by their employer shall be entitled to per diem compensation and reimbursement for expenses under 32 VSA 1010. Okay, so on page 19, section 3 starts the session law provision that lays out the implementation steps for the PUC. So on or before August 31st, 2022, the PUC shall commence a proceeding to implement the new chapter, the clean heat standard of this act. On or before October 1, 2022, the commission shall hire a third-party consultant to design and conduct public engagement. The commission may use funds appropriated under this act for hiring this consultant. And then here's what the public engagement process shall include. The PUC shall use the forms of public engagement described in this subsection to inform the design and implementation of the clean heat standard. The PUC shall hold at least 6 hybrid public meetings that allow members of the public to participate in person and remotely. The meeting shall be held in at least 6 different regions of the state. The meeting shall be recorded and publicly posted on the commission's website. In order to receive focused feedback from specific constituents, the commission, with the assistance of the consultant, shall hold at least 4 meetings using deliberative polling. The facilitator shall assist the commission in developing a format for using deliberative polling at the meetings. Each of these meetings shall focus on seeking input from a specific group, including heating fuel dealers, low income, moderate income, and fixed income customers and advocates, and customers who use large amounts of heating fuel. And then I'll talk about the third element is using workshops, which is what the PUC often does. But so this type of meeting using deliberative polling, I'm not very familiar with, but the House Energy Committee was very interested in this. It's a different way to gather information. It's kind of like using a focus group. So it does use inviting specific groups of people and then asking them questions about the clean heat standard to gather data on how they feel and what kind of elements the program they think it should have. So this is one of the reasons why the PUC will need a public engagement consultant, and it's to assist them in designing this deliberative polling process.
So the first 6 meetings in the prior section are pretty much more standard meetings in some way, but these are at least 4 additional meetings using this particular methodology of deliberative polling.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and then additionally, subsection 3, the PUC shall hold at least 2 workshops to solicit the input of potentially affected parties. The commission shall provide notice of the workshop on its website and directly to the Department of Public Service, Vermont's fuel wholesalers and retail fuel suppliers, renewable energy advocates, environmental and consumer advocacy organizations, organizations that serve low and moderate income Vermonters, organizations that serve older Vermonters, entities that provide weatherization services, energy transition providers, regional planning commissions, municipal energy commissions, community action agencies, environmental justice organizations, financial institutions with experience implementing low-income financing programs, affordable housing advocates, the Office of Economic Opportunity, the regional development corporations, and to any other person that requests direct notice or to whom the commission may consider direct notice appropriate. The commission shall also provide an opportunity for submission of written comments, which the notice shall include.
Okay, so that's 12 meetings that the commission's required to hold. And do you know what the time period is for all these?
Yeah, so it's going to start October. Well, they're going to have to hire a consultant by October 1, 2022. And the due date, I mean, I haven't gotten there yet, but the due date for the order is July 1, 2024. So it's just under 2 years. 19 months. Wait a minute. It's not 24 months. It's less than 2 years.
Right, I see an order, a date for the order, but I don't see a date for the draft order.
Yep.
Is that typical?
Can I read through it first?
Sure.
So let me just read through it and we can talk about it. So there is going to be a draft order required. So the commission, after they do the public outreach and engagement, they shall publicly publish a draft order and provide notice of it to the stakeholders who participated in the workshops. The commission shall provide a 30-day comment period on the draft and accept written comments from the public and stakeholders. The commission shall incorporate necessary changes in response to public comments before adopting the final order. And so there's mention next that there's advertising. The PUC can use funding appropriated on advertising the public meetings in order to provide notice to a wide variety of segments of the public. And then the order is due on or before July 1, 2024. The PUC shall issue an order to take effect on January 1, 2025 that initially implements the clean heat standard. So we have this draft order. They need to provide at least a 30-day comment period. So the draft order is due July 1, 2024. There's going to be at least a 30-day comment period. And the PUC is going to need to read and digest the comments and incorporate changes based on the comments. So from that, I think it's implied that the draft order it can't be, the latest it could possibly be would be June 1, but even that's cutting it pretty close.
Right.
So sometime before June to give them time to have that public comment period.
Great. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, so it is a lot of meetings. The House Energy Committee did discuss whether or not they should require that, like that they should have all the meetings first. Like, should they say the first 6 meetings need to be held before, March of 2023? Like they discuss whether or not they should require that all the meetings be right up front in the beginning and within a certain time period. They didn't do that, but they're going to be working with this consultant, and potentially this could be iterative with them, having the public meetings to gain more information, but then having the workshops where they, get feedback from the parties. So yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right, subsection G at the bottom of page 21, consultant. So on or before January 15th, 2023, the PUC shall contract with a consultant to assist with the implementation of the clean heat credits. So, they have to hire someone to help them set up the clean heat credit system, January 2023. On or before January 15th, 2023, the PUC shall report to the General Assembly on suggested revenue streams that may be used or created to fund the administration of the Clean Heat Standard program. And so this is an interesting issue. So currently, there's funding in the next section. There's an appropriation for some new positions at the PUC to administer the program, but it's one-time general fund funding, and the PUC is largely funded by the gross receipts tax, which is collected almost entirely from the electric utilities. I do believe the VGS, the Vermont Gas, pays it as well, but the sector that we're talking about under the Clean Heat Standard, they are non-regulated entities. They're not utilities. So right now they're not directly paying into the PUC here. So this is asking for the PUC to figure out how this program can be funded.
But they do have an obligation, correct, to pay, I don't know why it's an excise tax, basically a sales tax on heating fuel unless sold to a commercial establishment or something like that. That sound right?
Yes, although I don't know where all of that funding goes.
Okay. Senator Westman?
Oh,
We talked about this before.
is
I
that
don't remember.
is the reason they use one-time funds is where you're only, the study committee and all of that is going to go away after you develop the standard?
No, I think it's because I mean, currently the PUC is largely funded by the gross receipts tax. And so as we'll see in the appropriation section, this is allowing for the PUC to hire 2 full-time staff members and 1 temporary staff member to administer the program. So if in the future additional funding isn't appropriated for those positions, it's just going to be absorbed in the PUC's budget, but the PUC currently doesn't receive very much in general funds. It just comes from the.
I understand where they get their money. I'm
Yeah.
trying to rationalize why they would use a one-time general fund and be able to get by the laugh test in an appropriations committee.
Well, I don't know. The appropriations committee approved of this, but perhaps it's because it's asking the PUC 9 months from now to report back on how they think this can be funded in the future.
I suspect it'll be different questions asked in the Senate Appropriations Committee.
Before we go into the money,
Mr. Chair.
so, Senator McDonald.
Currently, the PUC regulates electricity and they get their funding from a surcharge on the electricity that they regulate. We are taking this clean heat standard as a form of regulation of fuels that are going to be regulated. So when the regulation kicks in, that might be the time to include the fee that would pay for the regulation. And it wouldn't be unreasonable to have a one-time fee to set things up in anticipation of a fee on the fuel that goes to the regulation of the newly regulated stuff.
Well, that's why I asked the question, if what we were envisioning is we set the standard up and what they were, and then we would move on an administrative piece after that.
Yeah, I think, Senator Westerman, are you and I saying the same thing here?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what I was agreeing with you.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, which is sort of the way things usually unfold.
Yeah. I think we're saying the same. We're paying a one-time basis to set the standard up, and then the administration of the standard would be a move on after that.
Okay.
Kind of.
I
think we're saying
Westman,
somewhat the same thing.
more clearly than I do. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, before we go on to the money in full, there's a report section, sub I. Can we go through that? Because I want to make sure I'm not missing something here.
Yep, so I'm on page 22, subsection I. So January 15th, 2023 and January 15th, 2024, the PUC shall submit a written report and hold hearings with the House committees on natural resources, energy and technology and natural resources, and the Senate committees on finance and natural resources, detailing the efforts undertaken to establish the clean heat standard and, to the extent available, estimates of the impact of the clean heat standard on customers, including impacts to the customer rates and fuel bills. So at the beginning of the next two legislative sessions, the PUC is going to report both in writing and verbally on the process that they've taken to establish the clean heat standard.
Okay. Thank you. So there have been, I'm guessing, did the House take testimony? I know there was, I believe there was an amendment offered on the floor, the so-called check back process. And so on one level, I'd say, well, this sounds to me like checking back. You deliver a report at the beginning of the session. The legislature has an ability to look at those estimates and then make changes to the program if it sees, I don't know, for instance, that it's gonna drive fuel costs higher than anyone ever thought, so they might change the program. But the check back request was for something more. Can you explain the difference? Because I think all of us are hearing about that too. Like, what did the amendment want compared to what is this report doing?
All right, so there was an amendment offered on the floor by reps Harrison, Fagan, and Murphy that would have required the General Assembly to affirm the report back from the PUC. And so it was requiring basically the signing of a new law saying the PUC has reported back on their process, and we affirm the work they're doing.
Okay. Is this a little, okay.
So it was
So-
requiring the passage of a law, including signing by the governor, to move forward. Yeah, and so if that law was not passed, the PUC was to halt all work until the General Assembly had affirmed that they could move forward with the work.
That was voted down.
Correct, that was voted down.
Well,
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems a little awkward to have them stepping up on an intense process and then put it into park while we're in session. Well, I suppose you could set dates that let them keep working, but sounds a little herky-jerky. Maybe the dates were all worked out and the second affirmation vote wouldn't have tripped up any of the parties.
So it required some of the, including in the estimates of impacts on customers, it added some language to estimate, okay, impacts on customer rates and fuel bills for both participating and non-participating customers, fossil fuel reductions and greenhouse gas reductions. So it added some additional language to that end of the sentence about what should be included in the reports, but yeah, I think there have been sort of rumored other or suggested other ways that you could handle a check back, but what was requested on the floor was the passage of a new law endorsing the work. Basically.
Could you send Jude and the committee, or Jude can send it on, the amendment that was offered so we see what that check back language was all about directly? Thanks.
Sure.
Back to the money.
Right. So section 4 is the appropriation section. So first, the following new positions are created at the PUC for the purpose of carrying out this act. 1 permanent staff attorney, 1 permanent analyst, and 1 limited service analyst. So 1 temporary analyst. The sum of $600,000 is appropriated to the PUC from the general fund in fiscal year 2023 for the positions established, for the consultant required for the public engagement, and for the additional operating costs required to implement the clean heat standard, including marketing and public outreach.
So was there discussion about whether 600,000 is enough to get 3 staffers plus a consultant hired and run an outreach program?
Yes.
Okay, it just sounds, it sounds like a surprisingly low figure for 4 people in an outreach program, but not my bailiwick, so.
I mean, yeah, so the Appropriations Committee did not amend this section. They approved it as written. So
Okay,
there were rough estimates provided at the beginning of this. I'm sure if you wanted to give the PUC more money to carry this out, they wouldn't argue.
Um, did these numbers come from the PUC?
The PUC specifically requested that staff. I'm not entirely sure if I don't entirely remember this precise origin of this number, but this is the one that House Energy landed on finally, and what the House Appropriations endorsed also. So I do think there's a fiscal note on this, but you
Yeah,
could.
well, I think we should see the fiscal note. I just think that to do this work, the PUC should give us what they think they need to get it done.
right, so, yeah, that would be helpful. Do you have access to that? I mean, can you request the note, or do we have to ask JFO? How's that work?
You should ask JFO.
Okay.
The
other thing I'm wondering, in B on the bottom of the page we're looking at, it says for the consultant singular, but there's 2 consultants that we've heard about so far.
Yep, that's a good catch. There's actually 3.
Hey.
Yeah, because there is a consultant to set up the clean heat credit system. There's one that will work with the tag on the relevant assumptions, and then there's the public engagement consultant.
Okay, thank you. Now it's looking, okay, great. Maybe one of the things that would be helpful would be to list I mean, there's a cross-reference like consultant required by SEC 3. But I had only counted 2, so maybe it would be helpful to everyone, unless you don't do it in statute, to list the 3 so everyone is aware of how many people we're accumulating. Although maybe one of them is over at the department, because consultants, well, anyway, they come up again on the next page.
So on page 23, there are then positions and funding for the Department of Public Service as well. So the following new positions are created at the Department of Public Service for the purpose of carrying out this act. 1 permanent staff attorney and 2 permanent classified program analysts. The sum of $600,000 is appropriated to DPS from the general fund in fiscal year 2023 for the positions created. To retain consultants that may be required to support verification and evaluation for the clean heat measures, and for associated operating costs related to the implementation of a clean heat standard.
Okay. I don't mean to be stuck on this, but I am just trying to keep track of all the players. To retain consultants that may be required, are these beyond the 3 that we've seen so far in the bill?
Yes, nothing in the statute contemplates the DPS needing consultants, but DPS specifically requested the language that's in C and D. So they're picturing that they might need consultants as well.
Thank you.
So section 5 is language that was requested by ANR. So it's a report. So on or before November 15th, 2023, the Agency of Natural Resources and the Department of Public Service, in consultation with the agencies of Agriculture, Food and Markets, of Commerce and Community Development, and of Transportation, and the Vermont Climate Council, shall report to the Committees on Energy and Technology and Natural Resources and the Senate Committees on Finance and Natural Resources regarding the role of individual economic sectors in achieving the greenhouse gas emission reductions requirement of the Global Warming Solutions Act. Each economic sector's proportional contribution to greenhouse gas emissions in Vermont as inventoried pursuant to 10 VSA 582, and the extent to which cost-effective, feasible, and co-beneficial, reasonably available greenhouse gas emission reduction measures are available commensurate with each sector's proportional contribution and emissions reductions impact. So something that came up in your committee last week was the idea that the Global Warming Solutions Act is referenced throughout the Clean Heat Standard, and there is a requirement that the Clean Heat Standard be designed to help the state reach the Global Warming Solutions Act requirements. But the Global Warming Solutions Act itself does not specifically dictate how much each sector needs to create, how much each sector needs to have specific emissions reductions. However, the work of the greenhouse gas inventory has done some of that work. So there are estimates about the fact that approximately 40% of Vermont's greenhouse gas emissions comes from the thermal sector. But so this report would sort of formalize that more specifically. So the agencies are going to look at each sector's proportional contributions to greenhouse gas emissions. The report shall consider the analyses performed in support of the December 1, 2021 Climate Action Plan and the 2022 Comprehensive Energy Plan. The report shall consider additional analyses as necessary. The report shall make recommendations to the General Assembly to amend the Global Warming Solutions Act to include sector-specific greenhouse gas emissions reductions requirements, and as necessary, subsector-specific greenhouse gas emission reduction requirements for the purposes of informing and appropriately scaling the implementation of programs and policies that achieve greenhouse gas emissions reductions. As used in this section, sector means those established in the greenhouse gas emissions inventory and forecast produced by the Agency of Natural Resources pursuant to 10 VSA 582. And the recommendation shall be made in consideration of the factors in 10 VSA 592D. ANR and DPS, in consultation with the Vermont Climate Council, shall submit an updated report and any corresponding recommendations in accordance with this section on July 1 of a year immediately preceding a year in which the updated climate action plan is adopted. And finally, this act shall take effect on passage.
Okay, on page 24, sub C in the middle of the page, when it talks about measures commensurate with each sector's proportional contribution and emissions reduction impact, does that seem, I mean, it's great to keep an eye on each sector's impact on emissions, but what if it turned out it was much cheaper to reduce emissions in transportation than thermal? But do you have to, does this in any way tie them to making, if it's 40% of the emissions are thermal, do they have to invest 40% in thermal, even if it might turn out that it was twice as cost effective to make a transportation investment? Does that make any sense, that question to you?
Sort of, but so this itself is a separate report. Can I quickly just, did Senator Campion leave the meeting? And is he
Yes,
now trying to get back into the meeting?
Yes.
Yeah, he's
thank you.
riding in his car and he's trying to listen.
Okay. Should I let him in?
Well, against your better judgment, yes, go ahead.
Okay. So, and Senator Bray, I think you asked this question last week. So the Global
Right.
Warming Solutions Act dictates that Vermont needs to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions by a certain percentage, by a certain date. It doesn't specify how that should be achieved, but it directed the Vermont Climate Council to make recommendations on how those emissions reductions can be achieved. And so last week, I think you asked about so the PUC under the Clean Heat Standard is supposed to tie the obligated parties' emissions reduction requirements to meeting the Global Warming Solutions Act. And so right now, officially, the Global Warming Solutions Act is not divided by sector specific targets. It's just overall for the state. So I think this report is in recognition of currently the greenhouse gas inventory does make some division about approximately where the greenhouse gases are coming from in each sector. But this, I think, is trying to drill down into that even more specifically, because the PUC is going to need that information in order to set the amounts. And so your last question about what if it's cheaper to reduce it in the transportation sector isn't actually relevant to this bill, because this bill is attempting to establish the clean heat standard to address Vermont thermal sector greenhouse gas emissions.
Sure. Okay. So in other words, that report, they might notice that it was much cheaper to reduce emissions in the transportation sector, but they're just trying to get the data at that point. Then it would become a policy decision that the legislature might then say, you know, given what we've learned so far, we're going to shift our investments more heavily to transportation or something like that. Okay.
Right, and so it does include recommendations for sector-specific reductions, but right now there isn't a clear mechanism for other sectors, and so this, this is one of the. It's not the first step by any means, but this is a step recommended by the Climate Action Plan to address the thermal sector.
Right. Okay. Great. Thank you for that. 2. All right, who wants to report the bill? Are you ready?
I'm ready to go in the morning.
I could do it later today.
Okay,
Oh,
excellent.
good.
I have my annotated copy here if you want it. So.
As long as I can do it from the car, I'll be okay.
You won't be able to get interrogated.
I think this is a bill that deserves to be reported by the chair.
I've been sensing all along I was going to win this lottery somehow, but that's okay.
I do have to say, like your question about where is transportation in this discussion.
Well, no better than 2 years.
Yeah, 2 years. Well, it still is the the sector that produces the most carbon.
Well, just before we met.
Are we getting,
Pardon me, I couldn't quite hear you saying, McCormick.
are we not getting transportation at all? Is that just being dealt with by the Transportation Committee? I mean, I presume that bill was gonna come to us as well because of the energy implications.
Well, this is a ripe topic that's been ripe for like 3 years, but nothing picked yet. So in other words, our committee has made recommendations to transportation because at heart, it's to many people, some people in this committee, it's an energy issue and an emissions issue. It's just energy that happens to be related to cars, but it has nothing to do with roads and bridges.
It's energy and it's also air pollution. I mean, it's the number one environmental issue.
I do think that that's a reason why we as a committee ought to figure out where we stand and advocate to have a discussion before next January.
How about before we vote the transportation bill this year?
I'm just suggesting that as we go through the process for referral of bills going forward into the future, that we might put a stake in the ground.
Clean, I don't want to say motor fuels bill, but clean transportation standard.
But I mean, also,
If there was a bill that had a clean transportation, well, you'd have to word it in such a way that it came to natural resources.
well, we need, but I mean, I had thought that this year we were going to be doing incentives to get into EVs and helps to people who want to get into EVs.
We've done that, but we haven't reduced the amount of carbon that our vehicles burn. In fact, new vehicle sales burn more carbon than in previous years. New fossil fuel burning vehicle sales get worse mileage than the year before and the year before and the year before.
Yeah, no, I know that. And you've done a good job of reminding us of that, Mark. But I mean, are we really going?
Well, it hasn't been worth much.
Are we really going to let the gavel come down in early May on this session and not have addressed that in this committee? I think that's unbelievable.
Have a what in this committee?
I was saying, are we going to let the gavel come down in May? Are we going to let this legislative session end and the Natural Resources and Energy Committee will not have dealt with the number one environmental problem, which is automotive related contributions of atmospheric carbon dioxide?
Well, we'll have dealt with it in a modest way, a very modest way, like the mileage smart stuff that we did last year, but no, really sinking our.
Oh, that's bullshit. Mileage smart doesn't put one additional car on the road. It simply drives up the price of used vehicles.
All right, well, actually, so rather than go off onto the transportation thing, we have not to date been invited into this conversation. We've asked to be part of it. And Senator Westman said, it'd be good to have that conversation more formally about our relationship to other committees. And I'm sure there are other committees that probably have the same thing, but if we wait till next January, they'll just say, hey, we have to gavel in 10 minutes and we don't have time to think this through. So I hope we work on it in the summer or something like that.
Well,
before we go.
Mr. Chairman, I disagree that it's a matter of us being invited or not being invited in. It's our conversation. And I don't think we should have been kicked
We have
out of
to
it.
crash the party.
It's our
We
party.
should crash the party.
It's our party. It's
Yep.
not crashing at all.
So I don't know if this is gonna help or hurt, but
Let's,
so the clean heat standard directly came out of the Vermont Climate Action Plan. And that's why I have a bill before you, because it was the committee bill from House Energy. One of the primary recommendations from the Vermont Climate Action Plan on transportation was joining the Transportation Climate Initiative, which
Sure.
fell apart a week before the plan was released. And
Yeah.
so there was a bill introduced in the House. I think there were actually two bills in the House introduced to join the TCI. They didn't move forward because no one else is moving forward with TCI currently. So there was a timing issue, but that said, you have authority to request bills to address issues.
May I,
Let me know if I can help. And I would just
Mr.
also
Chair,
add, it was briefly discussed about whether or not the clean heat standard should address other fuels, because that is what other states do. And I'm not suggesting that you wade into that now, but that was, so yes.
Okay, Senator Westman, then Senator McDonald.
aren't there two states, California and Oregon, that already have standards for cars?
Yes.
And are
Yes,
they?
and
part of the-
Washington has something as well.
No. So
are they all part-
there's three states that have standards for auto and transportation.
Are they all part of the Western Climate Initiative? WCI, which I think Quebec is also in.
Yes, although I'm not sure if that's actually the mechanism for their fuel standards.
Okay. Well, maybe that's something for us to work on for next session and introduce our own bill and go directly at it. As Senator McCormick says, it is territory. We don't need an invitation.
And so I did notice on your agenda that you have Corey Ann coming in from Oregon.
Yes.
And so, she's the manager of the Clean Fuels Program in Oregon. And her testimony in the House was very interesting. So I think she's the person for you. You can ask her a lot about what they're doing on that.
Oh, great. Okay. Thank you. Senator McDonald.
so I agree with Senator Westman that when the TCI went away, nothing has happened since then. And I think we should spend the next overnight or day or so thinking of how this big empty hole in the transportation policy has been created, and to work with members of the Transportation Committee to somehow acknowledge that in their transportation bill, and to say it has to be the council or whatever's goals somehow have to be represented in statute in the next, we've got to do something instead of just going home without any plan. So that wasn't very specific, but I think Senator Westman and Senator McCormick are both on the right track here.
Right. Well, I suppose we could also add something to this bill that would say something similar. Rather than if it would have the same.
Well, it's not a clean heat thing, it's a clean driving thing. Yeah.
Right.
Well,
Well-
I would disagree with that, Mark. It's about getting carbon out of the environment.
Okay, yeah, let's think in the next day or so where we could make that statement and push and pull our colleagues along in this direction, which has been, left behind. And whether it's the best place to do it's the transportation bill or this bill or some place.
I think we are comfortably in the gray zone where a thing is germane if you want it to be. There are things that clearly aren't germane. You're just monkeying around. I don't think it'll be monkeying around to say that even though it's a transportation related matter, that it is germane to this bill, because what the bill is about is energy, and it's about global warming gases being introduced into the atmosphere because of various uses of energy. If you want it to be germane, it is. And I think.
Yes, I was just going to ask council, Ms. Chakowski, if we had something about transportation in here. I mean, transportation does come up in some of these, like, they're a partner in this proportionality report, for instance, probably other places too. Do you have concerns that someone would say, well, this is actually a bill on a clean heat standard, you can't add anything about transportation?
It depends. It would depend. And I think nothing is non-germane. Something is only found to be non-germane if there is a challenge to it on the floor. So maybe.
We can presume,
Let's think
there
of-
would be a challenge. I think it just goes without saying there would be a challenge. But my sense is that we could answer the challenge. This is, again, I want to acknowledge that there are times when I'm saying it's germane if you want it to be. I'm not suggesting we play games with the rules. There are things that are not germane. But this is in that gray area where people who don't want to do it will say it's not germane, and people who say we do want to do it have a very legitimate case that it's germane.
I guess, and I don't know if we have time, but I don't entirely know what you would be interested in adding to this bill. Like, if hypothetically you were interested in what I was just suggesting and broadening this to a clean heat and fuel standard, like amending this program, or I don't know. I don't know. I could think about it. I mean, you certainly would have that option. I don't know how strong of a case it would be, but it would probably depend on what specific action you were seeking to take.
Well, as Senator McDonald suggested, it'd be good to sleep on it, and when we're in committee again tomorrow. But Senator McDonald, can you think about, a sentence or two, like what's coming to mind as you suggest that we get a stake in the ground and get something moving, which I
Yes,
like.
and I would consult the couple people in the transportation committee on how we might in a way that was that augmented the transportation committee and tried to put some pep into them on this issue because TCI has evaporated, and maybe maybe they would have some suggestions.
Okay, great. I like the idea of leaning into it some. So that really wraps up the walkthrough of the bill. I don't know if people, for myself, I'm going to reread the whole thing, I think, this evening. And now that I've heard about it in detail, and then we have testimony tomorrow and the next day.
I will say, Chris, you're an exciting human being.
You're the first person to say that. Thank you, Senator Westman.
maybe we go offline.
Did you just go off the road?
Pretty close to it.
All right. So that brings, thank you very much, Ms. Chakowski, for all that expert, patient help on going through the bill. And then, just for a few minutes at the very end here, I wanted to talk with the committee. I talked with Senator Westman some today and on the weekend, and we talked about it briefly at the end of a meeting. I don't know, I think it was Friday's session. We have a total of, I think it's 14 bills, and we literally have 3 weeks at 4. We have 12 committee days that we can count on. And although sitting down with a calendar, I tried to find a way to get as many as possible. And I'm thinking that my eyes may have been, bigger than my stomach. But I don't know that we can do justice to as many bills as we have in our inbox. And I'll send out the list to all of you directly. It's a lot easier to look at it. And I have the dates I shared in committee, I put into it. It has us moving very fast at the very end. Like, there are probably really 4 bills that could take 1 to 2 hours, and it would be fine. For instance, adjusting the administrative overhead rate on the petroleum cleanup fund. I don't know that, that kind of thing. But other things, so take that 4 out, that still leaves us with about 10, one of which is the clean heat standard, another one of which is the bottle bill, and neither of these are going down easy, I would say. There's work to be done in both, especially the bottle bill, which the testimony we've had lately leaves me concerned that just going ahead with how the version is voted out of the House and sent to us seems quite honestly risky to me, because we're hearing from people who are doing this work on the front lines day by day saying, we can't handle it.
Yeah.
Right? So I wouldn't feel like it would be responsible to. So we have this working group that's going to start this week. I'm hoping they can come back to us with a recommendation. I'd like to set them up in a way that we can talk to them enough, answer questions, ask them questions. They can work towards a compromise solution. And then meanwhile, we'll be churning away on other bills while they're working in parallel outside the committee. But I do sense we're going to have a somewhat difficult, sober conversation about which things can we commit to and which can we not. Maybe the session runs longer by a week than the announced date. Maybe that gives us an extra day or 2 here or there. But you know how hard it is to convene at all in the final 2 weeks. I mean, you can grab an hour here or there, but not much more, and at least in my experience. So thank you very much. For anyone have some thoughts on the overall, how much can we get done in a way that we think we're being responsible?
Point, yeah.
I think you can divide that bottle bill into how to take care of some of the problems that exist now with sorting and whether or not smaller facilities would be free to close and have someone else start an enterprise, and not link that to an immediate expansion of stuff that gets recycled. You could do it in 2, but we could think about that over and then come back with some ideas on it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough, if we adjust the borders for what's in the bottle bill and what's out, that's gonna be confusing to people to learn a new way of sorting their stuff. And so I wouldn't want to see us get into something, creating a new obligation for folks. Well, I shouldn't say obligation. Trying to get more bottles into the bottle bill, basically, if we didn't have confidence that the system was going to be ready to process them well. Because I can't imagine anything more frustrating than sending people in from one system that they may think is just fine, the blue bin, into the other, and then they get someplace and they wait an hour in line to drop off their bottles. Like we heard about.
Let's think on that. Thank you.
Okay, all right, great. So thank you, everyone. See you tomorrow, and this
Thank you.
meeting is adjourned.